Great. Welcome everyone to our, like I said, our first online program of the fall of 2020. We're really happy to have our speaker today, Ethan Bessie from Bessie Forest Products to talk to us about the wood market of today. I'm Jen Hicks. I'm the Director of Communications and Outreach for Maine Woodland Owners. And one of the biggest things I do with this organization is I edit the newsletter, Maine Woodlands. And the second biggest thing I do is make sure that our organization is staying in touch with its members and providing the kind of programming that you are looking for to support your work as woodland owners or forest experts or however you're connected to the Maine forests. So we're really glad to have everybody here. Albeit it's virtual, but it still gives us a chance to connect and hear from each other. Today's program is going to be 1 hour, and we're going to have Ethan provide a series of slides and a presentation, but I know that he's very interested in having people ask questions as well. I didn't clear this up with you, Ethan. Would you prefer that everybody wait to ask their questions at the end, or ask them as you go along? What's your preference?
Yeah, just fire away. I mean, in the chat or otherwise, but yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So there's two ways you could do it. I've had usually people will just put their hands up like this, and I'll call on you. Or you can, if you go to the right of your screen, actually, if you go at the bottom of your screen, you mouse over it, you'll see something called chat, and click on that, and that will give you a place to type in anything you want to send along to either me directly. I believe you could also just send, I don't know if you can send a chat directly to Ethan, but certainly to me or to everyone. Probably you send it to me, I'll go ahead and ask Ethan the questions I'm getting from chat. So that probably will work the best. And then once the presentation's over, obviously there'll be more Q&A. And then even after our hour is up, I would love to hear back from anybody who has more questions. I'll send them on to Ethan, or probably Ethan's happy to give out his email address. So we're always encouraging people to continue the conversation once these presentations happen. Just a quick plug, we are doing another one of these online presentations next week. We have Maine Forest Service Director Patty Cormier as our speaker. She's going to be doing a brown bag session during our lunch period. Or lunchtime on Tuesday the 27th. So I hope you can join that as well. You just go on our website, and on our events page, we have our registration with the way you registered here today. So you can go ahead and sign up for that. We still have a lot of room to join Patty. I think we have most everybody who signed up. So Ethan, I'm gonna pass it over to you. I'm gonna get the slideshow going. But Ethan, Ethan's the president, and I'm going to get the name of your company wrong. I called it Bessie Forest Products, but there's a couple different names you go by. But he's president of the company and works with a lot of the players in the forest industry. Has been our go-to for market updates over the past year and a half through writing in our newsletter, as well as he's provided a presentation for us earlier in the year. And so I'm sure things are different, but they are the same from the last time that you have talked to our group, Ethan. And I think we're all very interested to see what you have to tell us about where we are with the forest products market at this point. So I will get your slideshow up, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Jen. And thank you everyone for participating. I'll be the first to admit that I tend to listen to experts, whether it's epidemiology or heart surgery or diesel mechanics. But when I'm asked to be the expert on something, I start to doubt the wisdom of experts. So jokingly, I think we know enough of what's happening to be able to share a little bit about the market. But I think if we've learned anything, that everything is subject to change, and things are changing fast. I had one call today where someone mentioned, in 2015, we knew that mills were closing. We knew that things were coming. It was kind of a long, slow, it was shocking to get the news, but it kind of wound down for the most part. What we're experiencing now is much more sudden, much more fast-paced and unpredictable. But if there's one thing I've learned about loggers in the wood business is that people in the industry are usually committed to staying at it and find creative ways to make it work as long as they can, or even when they probably shouldn't. I think there are people that still stick with it. So I'll go through some charts and just trying to give an overall picture. I think the last time I spoke was early summer. I think is the last time we had a call similar like this. Of course, the big news for us, there's really two things, and then three, which is this chart here. The first, obviously, is the COVID-19 pandemic. Really, obviously, everyone knows by now has been devastating for a lot of industries. The good news is that building products and construction were deemed essential very early on. And I think I said it before, but while a flooring mill may not seem essential, the residuals that they produce that create, chips and sawdust that go to make paper, that make gowns for hospitals, et cetera, or sawmills where the byproduct might go into making pallets to move groceries, et cetera. So we were very fortunate as an industry to be counted as essential. The second big event is the mill explosion in Jay. We're still suffering that lack of a market. The latest news on that is we still don't know what they're going to do. I think it's premature to know if they're going to rebuild it. I think they're still in the investigative mode. We did get notice, however, that they are letting their wood buyers go, which, it's unfortunate. You can understand, even if they do rebuild, it won't be for another 18 months before they're actually probably buying wood again. So we're all hoping that happens and that the mill comes back, but it's just too soon to say one way or the other. The third thing, and we'll talk about this slide, the spruce fir lumber market. You look at this chart and it's kind of mind-boggling to see a chart like this. This is the price, it's the average. So it's not just the Boston market, which would be more indicative of what New England mills would sell by. But this was as of September 10th that lumber was trading on an average of $930. It's just crazy. You look at the price in May and heading into the summer, trading, somewhere at or just below 400. And I believe, I could be wrong, and I think the peak was somewhere like 1160. So, and it's come down since then. But this has been the story of the summer as far as markets. And the demand really comes down to, projects that were on hold, things that were paused in the spring. There were certain parts of the country where, construction was essential, but they limited how many people could be on a job site at one time. There's stories out of New York that you have these $1 million condos being built, but there's a section of the condo complex that was affordable housing, affordable, whatever that is in that type of building. And so they were allowed to work in that building because somewhere in that building there was affordable housing. Whereas other, even single family homes, they were limited by so many people on the job site at a time. My point is that it slowed down these projects. And so when things finally hit, everything hit at once, and the mills that just weren't prepared or ready got hit, and then prices spiked. And this happened throughout the country. So the good news is that spruce fir log prices, lumber prices, not log prices, lumber prices have been up. The downside is that it has not translated so much to the log pricing, and that's typical. There seems to be a lot more risk on the sawmill side. You think about hardwoods, for example. If we deliver a red oak log to Kennebec Lumber today, they're not going to be able to sell that as kiln dried lumber for probably 120 days. So 4, maybe 5 months from now, they'll be selling that stick of wood. So it's really hard to know what to pay for that log for hardwood, because you don't know what the market, particularly with everything going on in the world, what the market's going to be 4 months or more from now. Go on to the next slide, Jen. So you can see it's come back to earth a little bit, still at elevated levels. This was as of last week. So you can see it's off its peak quite a bit, but still relatively high. So this is the spruce fir lumber. This would be lumber used for construction. So 2x4s, 2x6s, studwood. The couple of factors here, as woodland owners and as people in the woods business, you know that not every stick of wood makes a log. And so having spruce fir log prices being strong almost on a spot market. And if you look at that chart, there's just a section. I mean, if you didn't know by mid-August that the price had gone up, by the time that you might have moved to a spruce fir lot, it could have come down. So that's the real up and down. But as we all know, the percentage of logs versus pulpwood, the value of the logs is much higher, but the volume is also much lower. And the flip side to this is that the softwood market for pulpwood is really just pretty bad, pretty terrible. There have been times throughout the summer where there's been openings where the mills will build up and do a run of pulpwood, and then the chip markets and the biomass markets again have really suffered, and they're just not taking as much as we would like them to. So on the one hand, you have this huge demand for spruce fir lumber, plenty of ways to get rid of your logs. Now we're looking at low grade. I had a call today from a guy that we deal with occasionally who had 10 loads of fir pulpwood sitting in his yard and asked if we had anywhere to go with them. And I just said I'd put him on the list, because at this point, I don't know when or where. But hopefully he did okay on the logs that he sold that came from that, or the high grade. 44 of the 50 states deemed construction as an essential business. Again, that's very good for our industry. And demand has been strong. In Maine, we've seen a huge influx. I think it was a New York Post article that came out over the weekend or last week about New Yorkers moving to Maine. And it's a non-scientific experiment, but I can tell you on my commute from Hollowell to Hinckley on 95, I can tell you I see more New Jersey and New York plates this year than previously. So it's not very scientific, but it's observation. A lot of people are able to work remotely. They're not having to live in Boston and New York or commute. And so they're wondering, why am I here? It's the existential, why do I live in a city like New York, for example, where they couldn't go see a Broadway show and the restaurants were closed down. And so a lot of folks have moved and are moving out. People in Chicago are buying land in Montana. There's a big land rush there. I read that sales of remote cabins in Maine, there's a subcategory of real estate transactions. Remote cabins were up 30% from a year ago. And because of this chart here with the lumber prices up, the National Association of Home Builders estimated that the average cost of a new house would go up $16,000 just based on the price of construction timber. Again, it's real money. You would think that might slow down the building, but because interest rates are so low, and because a lot of people that are able to work remotely are able to maintain their income, suddenly buying land and building a house in Maine with a decent internet connection and a strong cell phone signal has allowed a lot of these people to move. I met a family over the weekend that still owned a house in Brooklyn, Maine. No, New York, sorry, New York City in Brooklyn. And she's actually an attorney for a federal attorney, and actually still has her job because she still owns the house in Brooklyn, even though they have moved to Maine. So it's kind of the brave new world as far as being able to work remotely. But you know, hopefully all these people bring their talents and their energies to help make the state a better place. So spruce fir lumber markets. Let's go on to the next slide. This is just more, I just want to give historical context of where we're at. This only goes back to, what is that, 1980, maybe the late 70s. You can just see it's just by far record pricing without question. So you can go to the next slide. Oh, one back. No, go back. Yeah, it should be the hardwood, the number 4. There you go. So, yeah, one more. Great, perfect. I thought this was an interesting chart. This is going back to September of 2018. This is Eastern US hardwood sawmills, and it's a chart comparing production to working days in that month. And of course, the big thing to look at here is in May, you know, production dropped. This is for hardwoods now. You know, some of this decline can be attributed to weather, but you can look further and you see May of 19, and in terms of million board feet, it was probably, you know, 7.5 million board feet around May of 19. So the hardwood business has been hit. Some of this can be attributed to weather, like I said. Some of it can be attributed to the pandemic. The other factor here are tariffs. So in mid 2018, just to give you some context, we were exporting nearly $2 billion worth of product to China annually, just China, almost 50% of the total grade lumber produced. And then we entered into a trade war. And because of the trade war and the retaliatory actions, exports dropped 43%. And what happened is in February of this year, the Chinese granted a 1-year reprieve on tariffs. Something else happened in February of this year. A pandemic hit. So right when the mills that had come through one of the worst years for hardwoods production and sales, trying to find new markets, trying to figure their way through all this, the tariffs were lifted. I think it was February 20th. It was mid to late February. Pandemic hit. China obviously got devastated. Europe got hit hard. Suddenly borders are closed. People are hunkering down. So the hardwood business has been hit fairly hard. And again, this only goes to September, but you can see that production is down. Demand for logs is actually starting to improve, but as I indicated earlier, the price has not come up. We have a couple of crews that are not committing to pricing for this winter until we get closer to actually starting the jobs. Because if we were to quote, you know, maple prime, red oak #1, whatever, for a contract, the price today probably won't be what it will be in December. And we hope that it's going up. I'm told that hardwood mills are hungry for wood. They're looking for logs. They're just not pushing the price. And again, in times past, if a mill really wanted wood enough, they would pay more, or they would work out a special deal, or they'd figure out a way to get the wood to keep the mill moving. The risk right now is that if, like I said before, if you buy that red oak log today, you don't know what's going to be the market in January or February when that's ready to sell. The good news is we're coming out of the summer months. So whitewoods are starting to move better. We're not worried about spoilage. It's going to be interesting couple of years looking back to see what the tariffs and then what the slowdown in exports and production does to new export markets. There's signs that India has actually become has stepped into some of the role of a consumer of American hardwoods. Certainly not taking the whole piece of the pie from China, so to speak, but we're pretty resourceful as an industry. We try to find new ways to move the product. I know the American Hardwood Export Council has been very active for decades trying to develop China and the Far East as a market. And quite frankly, before China shut down, if you were not exporting red oak, which again, in Maine for hardwoods, we're really talking about red oak, red maple, some rock maple, ash, and then certainly, the whitewoods, birch. But as far as export consumption goes, the red oak and ash and some of the maple, mostly red oak and ash, were really in demand. When the tariffs hit, before the tariffs, if you weren't selling red oak to China, you weren't selling red oak. They did such a good job of developing an appetite for that species overseas. And what the tariffs did is they literally took our largest consumption of one of our most lucrative and best growing species and took our biggest market right off the table. As an industry, again, there has been a lot of effort to try to develop new markets. And like I said, India and the Mideast and hopefully Europe, again, will start to develop more of an appetite for American and particularly Northern Appalachian red oak, which we have plenty of. One more, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so this kind of touches on, again, just the drop in hardwood lumber exports to China. I mean, I'm a big fan of Dr. Nirav Shah from the Maine CDC, and one of the things I loved about his daily briefings back when everything was in chaos was he would talk about the human toll of the pandemic. He wouldn't just give the numbers; he would stop and he would, grieve or take a moment to recognize the human toll of somebody dying from this disease. When you look at a chart like this, I think it's also important to recognize the human toll of sawmills, people that work at these mills, communities that these mills are in, the truck drivers, the restaurants, everybody, that suddenly you can't operate and pay 50, 60, 70 people to work at your mill. So again, as you're looking at these charts, it's really devastating. I would say the good news is at the tail end of that chart, you do see it come up. So hopefully that's the trajectory. It'd be hard to believe that we could get back up to the peak, but if we could get back up to where it says Q1 17 on the far left within 2 years, and again, that's developing new markets and finding new customers for our products. I think that would be a good outcome. All right, next one. So housing drives a lot of what we do. I mean, certainly pulp and paper is a big factor, but housing in general, and one of the reasons why we look at housing permits and housing starts is because it drives a lot of the economy, particularly what we're making. And one of our businesses is we do custom wood flooring, and the demand for Appalachian white oak for flooring is unbelievably strong. Finding spot shortages of things, and it all seemed to come about in June and July, typically quiet months of the year. There have been years past where I could have disappeared in the month of August and nobody would have missed me. Had I not shown up or answered my phone in August, I would have left, 20% of my annual sales off the table. So, and a lot of this stems from, again, you look at the dip here, there was a real drop in permits. Again, you can look at when the pandemic hit, the fear. What happened was that everyone stayed home. And if you stay home long enough, and if you're able to do it, you start looking around and you say, okay, maybe we could build that deck, or maybe we could build the addition, or we could replace our floors, or we could whatever. Earlier this year, I spoke to Yoder's sawmill. They do mostly cedar, but other species as well. And what he told me was that his big customers had kind of slowed down, but he had more than made up for that volume in lots of smaller orders. Cedar, pine, eastern white pine, and hemlock really are kind of the do-it-yourselfers go to, at least in the Northeast. And so there's been a strong demand for these logs. Again, not a price increase. It has not meant a shortage and suddenly there's, instead of getting, $200 for a hemlock log, now you're getting, 300 or 400. It doesn't work that way, and doesn't seem to have ever. And the pine people I speak with, I was at one mill actually picking up an order, and I spoke to the salesman, and there were 2 tractor trailer loads of pine getting ready to head west. I think they ship as far west as Colorado. And I said, how's business? He said, if you were to call me for a truckload of material right now, I'd laugh you off the phone. And my first thought was, okay, so our price is going to go up. And his response was no. The pine mills traditionally haven't done that. They've learned over time that if they try to get more for the product and it gets more expensive, they open the door for, imported species and products, alternative items. So they have figured out that stable, steady, and keeping up with demand just through more production is the way to go. So again, obviously the spruce people don't keep that same philosophy looking at the previous charts, but this chart with the housing permits, it is a true V shape. Mostly if you look at the timing though, based on the calendar below, it's really based on people feeling comfortable moving forward. Also a lot of town offices that have shut down, or municipalities that are now remote. And so getting the paperwork through. And so as these things started to get figured out, permits issued faster, and those numbers getting close to where they were prior to the drop. Again, I talked about record low mortgage rates. It's playing a huge part in this. If you've looked at mortgage rates, or if you haven't and you still have a mortgage, I'd encourage you to look at mortgage rates, because it is almost, it makes me scratch my head as far as how it can work to charge so little. But what it does is it allows people to absorb increased costs. Everything related to construction is going up in cost. Labor costs are going way up. It's harder to find labor. I talked to a concrete vendor who his per hour cost, this is a year ago, but his per hour cost had gone up $5 in the course of a couple of months. And you hear stories of people showing up to a job site and offering people, $10 an hour more than what they're currently making, and they'll pick up their tools and they'll walk off to go to another job. There's just not enough labor. So labor costs are going up. Obviously, lumber materials are going up. And yet demand isn't stopping. There's a fairly well-known builder in Southern Maine that is currently telling customers that they can't build their houses until 2022. And they're still collecting deposits for those houses that they're 2 years out on building. So again, is that normal? Usually you'd call a builder, and if you like the builder and you know them, you might stick with them and get on their schedule. If someone's going to be 2 years out on building your home, either you're incredibly patient, or just you can't find anyone else even to call you back or give you a quote. And so I think as long as interest rates stay low, you're going to see a lot of demand. The other anecdotal thing I'll share is another builder friend of mine in Scarborough. has a house. It's, through a housing development, and then his house is kind of on the back of the development, and it abuts some undeveloped, actually conservation land. It's a nice house, nice backyard, pool. Got a knock on the door. A guy from New York. House is not on the market. Was offered to sell his house. And again, this is a builder who knows the market, knows housing prices. The guy said, "I'd like to buy your house and I'll pay you X." And the guy said, "Deal." He sold his house. They had a rental house that they were going to move to, actually a house he was going to flip. The plan was for the family to move there. Before that happened, another guy from New York knocked on that door and same thing, and sold that house. So completely unsolicited. The market is red hot. People can't find, they don't want to wait the 2 years. They'd rather spend the money and get what they want and get out now. So what comes after a boom? You have to think we come down to earth, and maybe next year there will be a settling or a shakeout, or let's hope not a burst of the bubble. But it seems hard to believe that there are that many guys from New York that are just going to show up unsolicited and start buying everyone's house up. But who knows? But like I said, I think the interest rates are playing a huge part of this, as well as people's desire to get out of more populated areas. All right, next slide. So our friends in the pulp and paper industry have been through obviously a tough go. But the good news is the mills that are still around, which you can count on one hand now, but they're doing okay. It sounds like. Obviously, when the price of this is a kind of a composite index of pulp, paper. Actually, sorry, this is wood pulp. My mistake. When wood pulp price drops, it's like anything. If you're selling toothpicks and the toothpick market drops, then you're not bringing in as much revenue. You can explain this in a couple of ways. Obviously, media paper is on the decline and has been. There's been a huge shift in schooling and work away from in-person work, in-person learning. Even though paper consumption and usage in those environments has also been down. More people working from home, more people using screens. There's also quite a bit of inventory out there. I think the mills have gotten very efficient. But everybody needs to keep in mind that I describe it as this. Imagine there's a pipeline, and let's just use water as an example. There's water going through the pipe. If you have spigots on either side of that pipe, and the water is going to gush out those spigots as it gets to it. If you start plugging up those spigots, the water keeps coming. It's going to go to the next spigot, next hole. At some point, if there's not enough outlet for what's coming through the pipe, you're going to have to slow down that pipe. And that's exactly what happened when the J mill exploded. Of at least in central Maine, central and western Maine, we had Sappi, we had ND, the new Nine Dragons, and then we had Pixel, which is now Pixel. We have Woodland further away. There's other outlets for this, but those are the big three. One of the big three gets taken off the table, and you end up with all of this wood coming through the pipeline, and there's no place for it to go. So you end up with the remaining mills trying to do what they can. And I'll tell you firsthand that they all are very well aware of the health of the logger and the health of the landowner. Biomass is an example of that. Even though gas is cheap, they could run their plants entirely on gas. They still put biomass into the mix because they recognize the need to keep that going. They wouldn't do it if it was financially completely insane to do, but if it's close, they'll do it. But they end up with a huge volume, and then when something like this happens and the paper price or the pulp price drops, then you start saying, okay, we need to shut things off. And that's what we've experienced. We've experienced lots of hard, firm quotas relatively fast shutoffs. 1 week you might have a pretty healthy quota, the next week you might have zero. And so that's again, they can only buy what they can turn into something they can sell. When the price drops, it will affect what they can ultimately take in. All right, next slide. So again, as landowners, changing times and changing realities of what wood is worth, and what stumpage would be fair and what would be expected. You may all know this, but if you don't, the state of Maine does publish stumpage prices, and it's historic. So it's not going to be, as of last month. I think in December of 2019, they put out the 2018 numbers. So it's delayed quite a bit, but it can give you at least an idea. It's also broken out by region. This is actually all regions, all counties. It'd be a good thing to reference as you're looking to cut wood, as you're looking to see what the wood would be worth. But again, I caution everybody as you head into the winter. It's a traditional wood cutting time of year. We already right now have shortages, or excuse me, limited quotas on what we can deliver. We get into a good frozen winter, perfect cutting weather. If there aren't enough mills and there's not enough desire to purchase that wood, then it doesn't make any sense to cut. The other thing that everyone should understand too is that if you're ever going by a mill and you hear me or someone say that there's no spruce fir quota for pulpwood, and you drive by Sappy and there's a huge truck of spruce fir pulling into the wood yard, there are fiber supply agreements in place. The big landowners, and then of course Sappy's stumpage program. These are things that most small landowners wouldn't be able to take advantage of, but the Sappy stumpage program may be, depending on the size of the job or who you want to have cut it. The advantage to that is that they really don't shut off deliveries if you're in that program. The downside, not a downside, but just they obviously take a cut for what they do, and then they also market everything themselves. If you're working with a forester, obviously your forester should know a lot of this and might know other ways to move, for example, pine pulp. Pine pulp has been a dog all summer. If there's an opportunity to chip it and sell it as biomass, or find another way to use it, to get something for it. But anyway, I just wanted everyone to know that there is this resource out there. It's a range, so there's a minimum, there's a maximum. I've looked at it. I think some of these are probably pretty accurate. But again, a lot has changed since 2018 in the world and in the wood markets. So this should be taken kind of as a historical context of what was, but also a ballpark of what you might expect. Next slide, Jen. So this is the last slide. I actually stole this from Maine Forest Products Council. It looks like they took it from 4Maine. And it's again, this is old information. It's from 2016. But it's basically the tons of wood being consumed either in woods biomass or mill residual. So mill residuals are like if Pleasant River sends their chips and shavings, and it gets used to burn for biomass, versus something coming out of the woods. And you can just see it. These are million tons in between those horizontal lines. So, it doesn't look like a big difference, but that's a lot. The thing I'd add to this is that Sappy has shut down, or will, if they haven't already, shut down their boiler in Westbrook. Again, go back to my illustration of that the pipeline. Anybody that had a contract bringing biomass into Sappy in Westbrook, I can guarantee you they're not all just going to throw up their hands and sell their equipment and walk away. So what it does is it forces every remaining biomass burning facility whether it's a standalone energy generation facility or a mill, a paper mill that's also buying in biomass, they could get inundated with biomass. And it could do two things. It could, first of all, make it the price so cheap that it doesn't make any sense to do it. But number two, it makes it for the landowner, if you want that look, if you want your woods to have all the biomass chipped, we could be back into a place where you may have to pay a logger to chip it into the woods. Or some of the larger contractors are actually working with kind of standalone chipping facilities. I know, like, for example, Linkletter and Sons, they have their own pellet company. And so if it's a large enough job, they could come in and they could chip the biomass or pick it up, and then whatever they could use, they would bring and they could consume themselves. So it's just, like all things, it's just a good thing to keep in mind as far as when you're planning to cut your woodlot. You're not going to get all logs. I mean, if you have all logs in your woodlots, give me a call. Let's talk. I'd love to see it. You're going to end up with pulpwood. You're going to end up with tops. If you have oak, for example, moving the oak pulpwood can be a real problem. And so as a landowner, you need to be thinking through that as, well, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to just leave the tops in the woods? It doesn't make good firewood when you're talking about twigs at the, kind of ragged pulpwood at the top. But it's just something to consider. I guess just as a closing thought, just the end of the slides, and I'd love to get questions and have a dialogue. The thing always I always encourage people to do, if you have a plan in motion, if you have a harvest plan and you know that you're going to cut your woodlot, and you've lined up the logger, which has been difficult lately to find the right crews, available when you need them. If it's a seasonal harvest, you can only get in there in frozen ground, and everything is lining up till, say this January is when the only time you can get the right crew in the road and maybe permission from a landowner, et cetera, to cross to get to you. When you're in that situation, you could pull the plug. You could say, no, we're not doing it because the markets aren't good. Inevitably, what I would encourage you to do is try to move everything, even the lowest grade. So example, cedar. Cedar does not pay a whole lot. We have a lot of cedar on our woods, and we always have to kind of nudge a little bit to get the cedar cut. Good cedar, there's demand for. Again, you're not going to see a huge return dollar-wise for it, but long-term kind of health and diversity of the forest, I would encourage you to take that. Hemlock, we've got hemlock everywhere. The hemlock log market is actually pretty good. It doesn't pay anything. And again, the hemlock pulp market is up and down. But again, I would encourage you to work with your logger, your forester, to find as many markets for as many things, even if it's in lower volumes or smaller pieces. Because long-term, the woods will be there. They'll continue to grow, and hopefully we'll come out of this in a different and stronger position. So with that, let's see if I have anything else. Yeah, with that, any questions or comments?
Chip,
Thanks,
this
Ethan.
is Richard Nass. The state stumpage report, this, as you pointed out, lists minimums and maximum. What purpose does the maximum have? Where does that number come from? It's just so far out of the average, I guess, that it makes me wonder that it has any use at all to anybody.
It's just what was reported. So they poll people, and they'll send a form, and they'll ask you to report, what essentially what you're getting for stumpage or on a particular job. So that's all it was. It was the minimum number reported, the highest number reported, and then, some sort of average. I agree. Some of these numbers you look at and you scratch your head, how can that be? And it may be an outlier, but it's just based on the reported number.
Is it of any use to you?
Well, it makes me know what I'd like to get for stumpage. If I see they're getting a huge number, I'll certainly try to push for that. Um, it's only useful in the sense that it's just data. It's just data. It's somebody, you know, hopefully truthfully reporting what they got. Um, and if you see, you know, a min and max that are pretty tight, you know that, okay, it's pretty standard. Maybe it's been that way forever. Like firewood, I have to look at the slide, but firewood's been, where is it? The firewood on this report had a min of 10 and a max of 50. That's per cord. You know, I think $10 a cord is pretty low for firewood stumpage. I mean, that when I looked at those numbers, I would say, you know, $10 a cord, but 50, it seems high, but not overly high. But again, you see the average, and then you also see the 2017 average in this report. So looking at, you know, when you look at these reports, it's lowest reported, highest reported. Also the number of reports in this, again, looking at firewood, there were 672 responses to come up with those numbers. So I would think the higher the sample size, you know, that maximum, or sorry, the average would be more representative of probably reality or what you could expect.
Thank you.
I have a question, Ethan. The shutdown of the boiler in Westbrook, is that temporary or permanent, do you think?
I'm told they're mothballing it well. So I think that means that they're not gonna completely dismantle it, but it won't be running. I don't know that mill well. I know the product that they make that quick release paper amongst other things there. And I believe they can actually make the material used for that better, cheaper, more efficiently, both in Cloquet and at Hinckley. So I think that was the reason for it. And they don't need the steam to do that. So they're going to shut down that boiler. And I was told that's up to, I think, 500,000 tons of biomass annually that will either have to find another home or just not be consumed.
Ethan, I have a question from Larry Beauregard. What's your sense of the long-term market here in Maine, especially with the reduced number of mills?
It's a great question. You know, I'm basically optimistic. I think, and my father has said this a lot, I think it's right. When a mill is investing in themselves, that's a great sign. So you look at what Sappi has done with the woodroom expansion from, I think it's four years ago now. Huge expense, huge investment. They wouldn't be doing that if they didn't see a long-term opportunity. You look at Pleasant River and what they've done with their new mill they brought on, as well as the upgrades and improvements they've made. You look at what ND Paper has done with Old Town. I would say the remaining mills that, as far as paper mills that we have in the state, I think are positioned to win. And have a couple of reasons. You know, don't forget Maine it's been called the most wooded state in the country. I think that's probably still true. We also have incredible roads and ports. So we can get our product anywhere as long as they also have ports and roads. So, and again, I don't think the Chinese would be coming here when they could go anywhere, whether it's in Africa or somewhere else in South America. So I guess I'm optimistic. You know, it's so as far as the mills surviving, I'm fairly confident that will work and we'll have mills. I'm less confident in the number of people we have working in the woods and the amount of fiber being consumed to make what they're making. That being said, I was told that Sappi if they haven't already, they're on pace to consume more wood fiber this year than ever before, a record amount of wood fiber. And next year, they're expected to actually hit a record again of consumption. But for anyone trying to sell wood to Sappi, they have tapped the brakes, they've put hard quotas, they've slowed down deliveries, and they're still consuming a record amount of wood. That tells me that there are a lot more people cutting wood and providing fiber than there are mills to consume it. So I think the unfortunate truth is that we'll probably have a reduction in the logger community, which is always unfortunate. But for things to come back into balance, I think that will happen, and it's already happened. Phone call today, actually, somebody said that they had 50 to 60%. They're operating at a 50 to 60% operating capacity. And so that extra 40 to 50% that they're not using, whether that's people that they're not putting in the woods or equipment that they're not using, unless things really come back, they're going to be parking that equipment and maybe, laying those people off or focusing on other business. A lot of these people also have construction companies, and they do paving, and they do, various other things. So as far as the pulp markets go, I think the mills that are left, barring any massive catastrophes, are set to win. As far as the lumber mills, we used to have a lot of hardwood mills in Maine. We used to have a lot of mills. And as we all know, there's just been a consolidation. There's been closures. There's been, people that just family isn't interested, and they close up shop. Again, I think what you're going to see is even further consolidation of that. You're going to see the mills that that are operating. The pine mills have gotten very strong, very efficient, and so I'm confident that we'll have pine sawmills, and we'll have spruce fir studwood mills, and then we'll also have the smaller kind of specialty mills that do cedar and hemlock. But again, I think you're going to see more consolidation, less markets, but still an outlet, maybe just in a smaller volume. I should say fewer markets.
Who else has a question or comment? Ethan works all by himself, so sometimes he needs people to give him a reality check.
That's true.
These are people that are in the woods. Well, like I said, I'm happy to receive any questions that I can pass on to Ethan. Or Ethan, did you want to give out your, not to corner you here, did you want to give an email address, or what would be better? Just have him send them to me.
You can always email me. I'm Ethan at bessieylumber.com. It's ETHAN at BESSEYLUMBER. And you can always call our office in Hinckley, which is 453-9388. And it's ED Bessie and Son is the company in Hinckley.
I got that.
But like I said at the top of this is such a rapidly changing world, and what is good today may not be right next week. And so, this at one point this summer, we could move just about everything. Things were great. And then I think a month later, we had 0 hemlock quota. Spruce fir was on hold. Hardwood was quoted. Everything just kind of, we had one crew that we set up to work in a fairly heavy hemlock lot this summer. As soon as the hemlock market shut off, we said, well, we'll move them. So we moved them to a predominantly hardwood lot. And just as soon as the skidder was delivered, the hardwood market shut off. So I actually said to the guy, I said, if you have to move your skidder again, let me help you with the cost of doing this. But it becomes a game of whack-a-mole. You can't just keep bouncing around. At some point, you got to just take a breath, come up with a plan, maybe slow the pace, and don't get too far ahead as far as, stacking everything up on the landing and waiting for a market. And thankfully we kept them at the hardwood lot because that has, like I said, come back and it's been okay.
So great. I'm going to read from David. I just got a message from David Wardrop. Good market summary. Thank you, Ethan. Would be nice for more leaders to forward and publicize the recent letter from Amanda Beal to USDA for assistance. So I'm going to share that. I believe that is that the is that part of the CARES Act? I think funding that we were. There's been some money flowing around regarding the pandemic. Larry's nodding his head. So yeah, I'll look up that letter and see if I can get that out to this group. David, if you wanted, did you want to speak more to that? All right, I will see if I can find that letter from Commissioner Beal and get that out. But there's that too, Ethan, that some things have been propped up because there's been some funding available from the government to cover costs during this uncertain economic time. So I don't know if that makes any difference. I guess if a mill's not taking wood, it's not taking wood, but maybe it's helped some smaller businesses stay afloat until things get straightened out a little bit more. I know that's certainly something the smaller businesses are facing in Maine.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you had to paint a silver lining around the pandemic, it happened basically in mud season. Most of us are in the industry are working outside, distance from other people. Our office was able to operate and continue operating. We just locked the door and we could either mail checks or, put something in the mailbox out front. But yeah, the Paycheck Protection Program was a lifesaver for a lot of people. But that's done. I mean, that really carried people through, able to make payroll through July or whatever they applied for as far as funding and how far it took them. But yeah, the reality now is that without additional, propping up or keeping people going, you need to have a market for what you're making. I also think Mainers, and I'm making generalizations, but Mainers and people in the forest community in general are not happy about taking money from the government, not happy about, having to be propped up. But this was extreme. I mean, this was out of everyone's hands, out of everyone's control. And it really did the right thing. It kept people going and able to make payroll. But like you said, Jen, if the market is not buying what you're making and you continue to make it, it's not a recipe for success.
No. Excellent. Well, thanks for the update, and we'll have you back in early 2021. We'll see what happens. Maybe we'll see what's happening at that point in our world and how that might be impacting our markets. So, well,
supposedly there's an asteroid that's supposed to hit right before Election Day. So
I heard
if we're not
too.
here by then, nice.
Why not? Why not? Let's have it. Thanks, everyone. It was great to see everybody again, and I hope to see you next Tuesday. And if not, we'll have some December events. I think one of them is going to be wreath making. Actually, I think we have a little bit of a holiday theme to one of our programs in December. And we've asked Nate Webb, who's the wildlife director for the Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Division, to come and speak and give us some updates as well. So checking in with all the commissioners near to the end of this year and looking ahead to 2021. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Ethan, very much for your time and your information.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great evening.
Thank you, Ethan.